All right, so welcome everyone. This is one of the free webinars that we do at Target Test Prep to introduce you to some important tips and strategies for the GMAT and also to introduce you to some of our instructors. So I am going to be sharing my screen here in a moment. Nope, I have the wrong thing open. I always have about 45 different tabs open. So here we are sharing my screen. Hopefully you can all see this here. So what we're going to be focusing on today is getting faster and more accurate on the GMAT Quant, with a little bit of an asterisk that we're going to talk about in a moment. But first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Kaylee. I've been teaching for many, many years, including over 13 years now teaching the GMAT. I love teaching. I love nerding out about how people learn. My master's was in educational neuroscience, so I love thinking about and studying how people learn and how to design learning systems that maximize the return on investment of your time. So it's wonderful to meet all of you. Just out of curiosity, go ahead and tell me in the chat, where are you all dialing in from? I am in Brooklyn, New York. It's a bit of a gray and rainy day here, but excited to have you all. All right, some other New Yorkers, some folks from around the country, around the world. Welcome, especially to folks dialing in from India or Dubai, where I'm sure it is not normal studying hours there. So I'm really excited that you chose to dial in and join us live. So, did you know that there are only 3 types of people in the world? Those who make math mistakes and those who don't? Uh, uh, that is my favorite really, really, really stupid joke. So the idea here is that, of course, everyone makes math mistakes. There's no such thing as a type of person who doesn't make math mistakes. So what our job is when we're studying for the GMAT is not to try to be perfect, but instead to think about how can we minimize the mistakes that we're most prone to, and, maximize the possibility that we're going to get things right. That said, you're going to get things wrong, and that's okay. I make mistakes all the time. You might even see me make one here tonight. If that happens, please call me out on it. So here's our agenda. The title of this lesson is a little bit of a lie, Getting Faster and More Accurate at Quant. What you might be picturing is me giving you tips for doing algebra faster, being able to put math on the paper and solve it more quickly with fewer mistakes. And that's not actually possible, or not really in a 1-hour webinar, right? So what I'm going to give you is some advice that is actually more practical and is going to make more of a difference in the long run. Yes, you can get faster with diligent study. You can get accurate with more practice, but there are ways to structure your process to actually improve your accuracy quite a lot in a short amount of time. So what we're actually going to be focusing on is preventing errors before they happen with something, my patent pending process called the pen down process. It's what I insist that all of my students use. And then avoiding future errors with rigorous review. I know you're going to be bummed out by this. You really wanted just like tips and tricks, and nope, it just comes down to review well and review thoughtfully. But we'll talk about how to do that. I'll give you some tools for how to do that well. And then instead of thinking about it as getting faster, I want you to think about it as getting smarter by training for multiple solution paths so that you have the tools at your disposal to recognize which strategy to use in which cases, and that will ultimately save you time. So I'm going to just throw you right in the deep end by giving you one of the hardest problems that maybe you've seen. This is a problem that I see a lot of students get wrong. And I'm going to be nicer than the GMAT would be. Instead of giving you a 2-minute timer, I'll give you a 3 minutes for this. And what I'd ask for any of the ones that we do here is send your answer to me as a private message, just so I can see what folks are thinking. If you're stuck between two answers, you can also be like, I think it's this one, or you can also just tell me if you have no idea. So I'll give you 3 minutes starting here. "15 seconds left, so send me a guess if you don't have an answer yet." Okay, that's time. That's 3 minutes. So this is a really complex question. I know those rate problems when we're talking about people working together or machines or printers working together are some of the hardest, some that give people a lot of anxiety on the GMAT. But before we get into how to solve this, a couple of things. One, whenever I write my own versions of official guide questions, I like to throw in names with crazy Irish spellings just because it amuses me, because I have a crazy Irish spelling. So in case you're curious, these names are Aoife, Blonid, and Cuiva, of course, right? So before we do this though, when I'm teaching in person or when I have online classes and I can see students in the Zoom screen, I like when folks have their videos on, I always watch to see where their eyes go and where their pen goes. And I often see a lot of this. Look up at the screen, look down at the paper. Look up at the screen, look down at the paper. Up, down, up, down. And first of all, I think you get whiplash doing that. But secondly, that's that's a strategy that's bound to get you a little bit distracted with your attention in two different places at once. So I want us to talk about the things that I think that everyone should do on every single quant question before you start solving, before you start writing things down. This isn't reading comp. You don't need to take notes. And I really recommend that you do not write out equations as you're reading. Because if you're writing while you're reading, you don't know what you're solving for yet, right? You don't know where the question is going, and you might be setting it up for the wrong thing. So here are the steps I want you to take, regardless of the problem. The first thing that you should do, and it might be obvious, but it's shocking how many people don't do this, read the whole thing before you start unpacking it and writing things down. Just read the whole thing, especially if it's a complex word problem. Tell yourself the story of what's going on here. Okay, we've got 3 people, they're wrapping presents, one's faster than the others. Okay, but then we're comparing one of them to the 2 others working together. Okay, cool. Now, second step. Actually, let me ask you, in the main chat, tell me, what are there, to my mind, there are 3 more things that I think you should do before you ever touch a pen. Any guesses? And put them in the main chat. I saw someone say something very astute in a private chat, but put those in the main chat. Read it twice, maybe. Identify what you're solving for. That is a huge one. And then, Abby, I would say not a maybe. Definitely look at the answer choices. Think about them. This is not a high school test where you have to show all of your work and you only get points for doing things the right way and then you pick an answer at the end. The answers are there. They're part of the problem itself. No one cares how you get to the answer. So use the answer choices as clues. First, though, to what several people were saying, I like what Yigo was saying about identify the problem type. So think about what the category of the question is, and then within that, think about what it's asking for. And I want to add to that, think about what it's asking for, but then think about what it's not asking for and where people might fall into traps. Where does the GMAT test writer want us to make mistakes? So what is this question asking for? It's asking, what is the ratio of the time that it takes Aoife to wrap 10 presents working alone at a concentrate to the time that it takes Blonded and Quiva working together to wrap the same amount? Okay, so here's an important thing to flag to yourself. It's asking for a ratio of time to time. Where might somebody fall into a trap here? What mistake might the test writer be expecting us to make? Utilizing the rates. Yeah, for those of you who are saying looking for a ratio of rates rather than a ratio of times. A lot of people will set up math that is true, it's correct, but then solve for the wrong thing if they're not flagging to themselves in advance what the question's asking for. So we want to look for time over time. So then let's think about that. If we want to get the time that it takes Aoife working alone, so we'll call that time sub A, as a ratio of the time of B and C working together. Well, whenever we're looking for a ratio, the fundamental question we should ask ourselves is, what's bigger, the numerator or the denominator? In other words, who should be taking more time? One person working alone or 2 people working together? In the chat, give me a vote. What should be bigger, numerator or denominator? Numerator. One person working alone is going to spend more time than 2 people working together. Even though those 2 people were a little bit slower individually, still together, they're probably going to be more efficient than one person working alone. So once we've thought about the question, thought about what makes sense and what doesn't, now we get to that step that a lot of you pointed out. We should look at the answer choices, think about what makes sense and what doesn't. If we want larger numerator, smaller denominator, we should get rid of any fraction less than 1, anyone with a smaller numerator, larger denominator. So, oops, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to use my pen tool there. A, B, and C are out. If you went through that process, eliminating those before you start because you told yourself these don't make any sense, then if you did some math and you got to an answer, but you're like, wait a minute, I already flagged that that was wrong, you are then going to notice your mistake and figure out that you were answering the wrong question. I got a lot of answers that were the flip of the right answer. By the way, did you notice this? C and D are reciprocals. A and E are reciprocals. So this is an idea that I like to call evil twins. You may have heard other people using that term as well. The idea is that if one of those is the right answer, then the other one is the evil twin of the right answer. It's the flip side. It's what you get if you answer the question backwards. So we're now down to 2 answers. And what's really cool about that is if we get stuck, if we're not sure what else to do, we're at least down to a 50-50 shot, right? But I think we can actually take it one step further. And Rura, you actually said something really interesting in the chat. Do you want to come on the mic and explain your thought on that one?
Yeah, sure. I started solving and then I realized between D and E, like if we, I don't like fractions. So if I just think about it in decimals, E is much larger. And considering that the rates are like 6, 8, and 10 minutes, it seems like E is less likely to be the answer. So like if I was running out of time, I just put D. I think that was my rationale there.
100% agree. Does everyone else see that? D is a ratio of one number that's bigger and one that's smaller, but they're not that far apart from each other, right? This would be a ratio greater than 1, but less than 2. But E, on the other hand, that's 9/2. That's more than 4. Do we think that Aoife is going to take more than 4 times as much time working alone as the other two working together? She'd have to be really slow relative to them for that to be the case. And she was actually faster than them to start with. If they were all exactly the same to start with, had all of the same individual rates, then what would the ratio be of her alone to them together time? If they're all the same rate, it would take her twice as much time working alone as the two of them together. So it would be 2-1, but she's faster than them, so it should be less than 2-1, right? So it's not just a, I'm going with my gut, I kind of don't like E. We can actually say confidently, E does not make sense. It's out. The answer has to be D. I don't care, and I didn't prove that the answer was 27/20, but I proved that the answer was D because none of the other ones make sense. It's the only thing greater than 1 and less than 2. We've fully solved the problem without doing anything except cross out answer choices. I'm not going to say that that's going to work every time. Of course, I picked out this problem on purpose because it works that way. But this works a lot more than you think. Thinking about the answers can help you avoid a lot of math. If you spent 3 minutes doing a lot of math only to get to D, okay, you got to the right answer, but you took a lot more time than you needed to. But if you got anything else, there's probably something in your process that you could have flagged to yourself by using this process instead. So let's say that we got down to 2 answers that both seemed reasonable at this point. Then we'd want to choose a strategy. Think about our options. How could we solve? Do we want to set up a rate chart? Do we want to try to estimate? What should we do there? But on this one, we didn't even need to get to that point because we got all the way to an answer just using this strategy alone. Step 5 would be solve carefully if you're going to solve it, either algebraically or using some other strategy. But this brings us to a really important principle about how do we get more accurate. A lot of times it's not about being more accurate in what you're doing on the page. It's avoid doing things on the page. flag the errors to yourself before they happen. Um, I always like to say that the GMAT test writer is like a Scooby-Doo villain. You know, they're evil, but in really predictable ways. They are setting us up for traps. It's like like where you dig a hole in the ground and you just cover it with sticks and leaves and expecting us to walk right into it. And sometimes we do. We've all done it. But if we are looking around saying, okay, I know they're trying to set a trap. Where are those sticks and leaves so I can avoid them? You're going to be a lot more accurate down the line. So yeah, Tyler, the reason that we know that the numerator has to be larger than the denominator is that we're looking for a ratio of time. And so we know that even though she is a little bit faster by herself than the other two together, she's not much faster. So it is generally true that when people work together, at least on the GMAT. I think in real life, when people work together, sometimes they take longer than they would take individually. But on the GMAT, at least on this type of problem, people are going to be faster working together than working separately. So they will take less time working together. They would take more time individually. So because 6, 8, and 10 are relatively close together, we know that her time by herself should be more than their time working together. Did that answer your question? Great. Um, if we have more time later, we can come back to this and talk about how you would set this up as a rate problem, but that's not what we're here for right now. I want us to move along and talk about this principle of using logic before math to prevent errors. This isn't going to work on every single problem. Some you evaluate, you identify the question, you look at the answers, and you're like, cool, I still got nothing. I still have to solve. And all right, then you just go about the solving part. But you've at least kind of told yourself where mistakes might happen. That can help you to avoid them. But if you're able to eliminate several wrong answers just using common sense, which is the case on a lot of problems, I once, just to test this theory, flipped through the official guide, and I was able to eliminate at least one clearly wrong answer choice, usually more than one, on well over half of the problem solving, the standard multiple choice quant problems. So it works a lot of the time. And I want you to start using it every time because, hey, every error you avoid helps. So let's try this pen down process again. I'll give you another problem to do. And here's what I want you to do. Just don't even touch pen to paper. Try solving this one just using common sense and putting in a guess answer. Oh, wait, sorry. I forgot that there was one more thing I wanted to say before that. When we're talking about analyzing the answer choices, often students ask, well, what do you mean by that? So in the problem that we just did, scanning the answer choices meant noticing that we have two pairs of reciprocals here. B was the odd one out. That means it's a lot less likely to be the right answer. It happens every once in a while, but it's a lot more likely that the answer is going to be in one of the pairs if you have sets of pairs. The other thing to notice, because this was a ratio problem, or even if it were a different kind of fraction problem, the greater than one, less than one threshold is an important thing to flag. And if you can use logic to figure out whether you want numerator or denominator to be bigger, you could eliminate either 2 or 3 answer choices right off the bat. So take a look at these other two sets of answer choices without a problem attached, and just think about what stands out to you, what you might notice. And of course, it's all very open-ended, but in the main chat, tell me on this second one, anything you notice here? All right, so we're ordered smallest to largest. That will often be the case, in fact, most of the time. Ooh, we've got some units digits of 5 versus units digits of 0. That might help if we can do some estimation and figure out if we want a multiple of 5 or, well, a multiple of 10 or a non-multiple of 10. More or less than the 50%. Yeah, that's what I had flagged here first. If we can use that as a threshold, usually a percent question, we can figure out, do we want that number to be a pretty large percent or a pretty small percent? And then, ooh, B and D here are a pair that add to 100%. That is a really important thing to notice because this set of answer choices came from a weighted average question where it was like, we're mixing some of liquid A and some of liquid B together, and they're each like this much concentration of alcohol in the mixture. The overall mixture is this. What percent was liquid A? If you answered the question backwards and picked liquid B instead, then that answer would be waiting for you. In a problem where you have two variables, liquid A and liquid B, there is a really good chance that if they ask you for one of them, they will include a trap answer for the other one. So if you flag that to yourself ahead of time and you notice which answer choices are in pairs, then at least if you get stuck somewhere along the line, you know that the odds are much better that the answer is B or D than any of the others. And just flagging that to yourself can help prevent picking the wrong one. Um, the last one's a little bit different. One thing we notice here is, well, they're all threes, right? Aha, 30% and 3% versus decimals. So you know that thing when you're solving a percent problem and you're using decimals, and maybe you get 0.03, for example. Well, 0.03 is not the same as 0.03%. They are messing with your expectations of percents and decimals and expecting you to mix them up. So be really careful that you don't mix it up. That's what you should flag to yourself here. The other thing to flag is, hey, the answer is going to be 3, right? Why do the math? You're going to end up with a 3. The only relevant question is, where does the decimal point go relative to a percent? So if you just then think orders of magnitude and count your digits, you might not actually have to do any arithmetic solving here. The list can go on and on and on of different things to look out for in answer choices, but I want you to practice this. And I actually recommend grab a copy of the official guide, flip it open, and just look through answer choices and ask yourself what you notice. And sometimes it's like, I don't know, not much, but sometimes you can really notice where they're trying to set you up with traps. Lauren, are there any that use are you saying like use 3 BPS as the like nomenclature that they would use? No, they're always going to use the term percent and not basis points or anything like that. So the GMAT is pretty consistent in its usage of math language, and it keeps it nice and like middle school to high school level. So that's good for folks who didn't take really finance-based math. Nice. Any other questions on this idea? Okay. Now I'm going to throw you one to do, and I want to give you the challenge of try to do it no pen and paper. And DM me when you have an answer. All right. So if you have an answer, send it to me as a direct message. And in this one, another set of amazing Irish names. We've got Oisín and Pádraic here. So if we're looking at a problem like this, we've got two people driving toward each other. This is what I was talking about of the kind of problem where you have two variables, essentially. We're looking at the distance for two different people going toward each other. If they're asking you about how far one of them traveled, there is a good chance that they are going to include a trap for the other one, because I actually got a couple of people saying this in the chat. They were like, "Is this one? Oops, wait, no, I mixed it up. It's the other one. I got the names mixed up." They want you to get the names mixed up. They want you to forget who you're solving for, especially if you end up using like X and Y and you forget who was X and who was Y. I usually recommend using the letters in their names, although in this case, P for Pádraic is great, but O for Oisín, O is a terrible variable because it looks just like 0. So if you were using variables, you'd pick a different one here. But we were just using that pen down process. So when we're thinking about a 40-mile trip, what is our relevant threshold here? Well, how about the halfway point? 20 would be the halfway point here. In what kind of scenario, if two people are driving toward each other, in what kind of scenario would they meet exactly in the middle? If they had the same rate. But do they? Clearly not, because it took them different amounts of time to complete the entire trip. So then, really, the only question we have to ask ourselves at first is, who's faster, Pádraic or Oisín? Well, if it takes Oisín 5 hours, but it only takes Pádraic 3 hours and 20 minutes, Pádraic is faster. So he should have completed more of the trip when they meet. That means we should eliminate anything 20 and below. So once again, we are starting off the problem with 3 answer choices off the table. That's got to feel good, right? It only makes sense for it to be D or E. Then we would look for those patterns, those pairs. Although in this case, we've got 16 and 24 are a pair, but 8 and 32 are also a pair in terms of two things that add up to 40 miles total. So that didn't help us narrow it down. But I'm seeing in the chat that I'm getting a lot more guesses for D than for E. Does anyone want to volunteer why you chose D instead of E?
I can do that.
Please.
Uh, yeah, so basically, uh, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name,
So you could just say P and
but
O, that's fine.
yeah. So I basically assume that P will be traveling at half the rate of what O will do. And by comparing that, I saw that it would be close to around like maybe more than 24. So that's how I assumed it would be 24. So
I love it. So you used a benchmark. What if he's twice as fast as the other guy, essentially?
correct,
'Cause we're like,
yes. Yeah,
3 hours and 20 minutes versus 5. We could sort of like round up a little, round down a little, and say, let's say it's like a almost 3 to 6. So it's almost a 2 to 1 kind of thing. Well,
correct, yeah.
if it were a 2 to 1, then they should meet at the 2/3 and 1/3 point, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that we could use as our benchmark. And then thinking in terms of that, a little above 24 might make sense. So I like that as a benchmark, but now we know we rounded up a little bit, basically making Pádraic a little faster and Oisín a little slower. So if we want to adjust that, if we think in terms of our entire line from 0 to 40, if this is Pádraic going this way, if you were twice as fast, it would be at the 2/3 mark, but it's going to be a little bit less than that. So somewhere past the halfway point, but not quite to the 2/3 mark. So yeah, that makes sense to me. I like that as a rationale to guess 24. And then, okay, I like the idea that Ashin goes 8 miles an hour, 40 miles in 5 hours. We know that he's going 8 miles an hour. So the 32 would be his 1 hour mark. But that's 32 is not Parek's 1 hour mark. So 32 and 8, these are just too far apart. This would be going 4 times as far as this one in the same amount of time. So from this point, 32 versus 8 should feel like way too much, like this too much, this too little, versus 24 and 16 should have that kind of Goldilocks. It should feel just right, that this is shorter, this is longer. On the GMAT, if you do this analysis, if you get to this point and say, okay, I've got it down to D and E, definitely. It's got to be one of those two. But I'm pretty strongly leaning toward 24. 32 feels a little too big. At that point, you can then make a judgment call. Do you want to take the time to prove that it is 24? Or do you want to just ask yourself, okay, do I feel pretty sure? And here is something that I want you to think about. The GMAT is a game of strategy overall. It's not about just that one question in front of you. You're not aiming for 100% accuracy on every single problem. You're aiming for getting a lot of questions right by the end and a lot of questions at a pretty high difficulty level, right? Being 80% sure in, oops, sorry, it prevents me from typing when someone is logging in. 80% sure in a minute and a half is much, much better than 100% sure in 4 minutes. If you spend 4 minutes on a problem, you have effectively robbed 2 minutes from other problems in the future, meaning you are betting that it's more important to get this one right than to spend those 2 minutes on future problems. I assure you, it will be better for you in the long run over that span of 21 questions to just lock it in when you're 80% sure and not do the work. Remember that now on GMAT Focus, there is a new feature that allows you to mark questions to go back to. This would be a good opportunity. Pick D, mark it to go back to, and do the math to prove it out if you have the time. And then if you had the time, there are many other ways that you could solve it. You could set this up using algebra, you could set up a rate chart, or you could just calculate their respective rates and chart it out hour by hour. Did any of you do that? Did any of you try that idea of, okay, let's just say we know that Ashin is going 8 miles an hour. We have to do a little bit of calculation to figure out that Parks is going 12 miles an hour. If we do that much calculation, we can then figure out, okay, in 1 hour, Park would be at 12. Ashin would be at 32. In 2 hours, Park would be at 24. Ashin would be at, oh, hey, also 24. They meet up at exactly that 2-hour mark. So this would also, charting it out rather than doing algebra would be a fast and effective way to do that. But I want you guys to get to the point where you are eliminating answer choices before you start, no matter what strategy you end up using. Questions on this one? Okay. So, oops. That one of the ways to prevent errors from happening is to use that pen down process to think about where the traps are going to be, eliminate things that don't make sense so that you don't accidentally choose the evil twin. The other thing that prevents errors from happening is using careful review. And I would bet that there isn't a single person here who is reviewing as much as they should be reviewing, because we all have that feeling. I do this too when I play chess games on my phone. I'm kind of terrible at chess. And once I, make a mistake, I'm like, let me just do another one. instead of really sitting back and being like, well, why was that the wrong move to play? What would the better move be? So even though I teach this, I still don't always practice what I preach in chess. But on the GMAT, I want you all to be reviewing way more than you are now and avoid the temptation of just the dopamine hit of doing another problem to see if you can get it right. So the pen down method is not just for word problems, it is for every single problem out there. Sometimes with the pure math ones, there's less that you can eliminate. Often with a word problem, there's more that you can kind of use that logic on. But I've certainly seen, you know, let's say a kind of pure math percent change problem with answer choices. A lot of times you can be like, well, that variable shouldn't go there, it should be here. That doesn't make sense. It's too big, too small. So there might be less kind of to do on non-word problems, but it is a technique you should try every time. So if you are not yet doing this, I'm going to insist, I mean, not that I'm going to be checking up, but my strong recommendation is that you use a review log of some kind. It can be a spreadsheet, it can be just pen on paper. If you use the TTP platform, they have an error tracker, which is an incredibly useful tool. And so you want to track the mistakes that you've made, and really in detail describe what went wrong, why you made the mistake, because just being like, silly mistake, well, that's not that helpful. That doesn't help prevent you from making that kind of mistake in the future. So we'll take a look at my error log in a moment, but here's what I want us to be thinking about. When you get a question wrong, like let's say for those of you who chose C on this one, this might look like what your note paper looked like. Here's what you want to do when you're reviewing ones you got wrong. First, redo it rather than reading what someone else said about it. Have you guys ever had that thing where you ask someone for directions and they're like, okay, go down here and turn right and then turn left, and you nod along thinking that you get it, and then you're walking and you're like, oh, I don't remember what they said at all. So when we just get someone else's explanation, it's easy to forget. If you do it yourself, I guess in this metaphor, that would be pulling out the map and looking for yourself where the thing is. On the GMAT, if you're redoing that problem yourself and you have the aha moment of what went wrong and what you should have done, it's a lot more likely to stick with you. So redo the problem before you read someone else's explanation. Then look at your notes. Keep your scrap paper always so that you can look to see where did it go wrong. So here in this example, this might be what this one looked like for some of you. Okay, the question was set up A over B plus C, but A, B, and C, those are the names of these girls. Those aren't the variables we're solving for. So this didn't flag to me that I needed to solve for time, not rate. And so then ended up finding the common rate and setting it up as a ratio of rates. So that was the mistake. It wasn't a content error, right? I understood how to set up rate problems. This mystery student here. It was a process error, solving for the wrong thing. Other process errors would be an arithmetic mistake, a cancellation mistake, setting up the algebra incorrectly. Get really granular and really specific about where your mistakes were. And then ask yourself, what would prevent that mistake the next time? How can you improve your process? It's not really enough just to say, don't do that again, right? You want to articulate something that you should change about your process. So in this case, the thing to change would be define the question first, write the question down carefully. Don't do shorthand, instead really write in words the thing that we're solving for. I bet most of you are reviewing wrong answers and you probably are looking at your notes. You're probably not taking enough of that next step of what would you fix for the next time, and you're maybe not logging it, but I bet you're doing this part okay. Here's the one that I bet most of you are not doing well or doing nearly enough of, and that's reviewing your right answers. Let's say you approach this one did it beautifully. You're like, oh, I'm going to just chart this one out hour by hour, use good pen down process, eliminated some things at first, pick the right answer. I mean, pat yourself on the back a little bit, but then you're not done with the question yet. Take it a step further. For right answers, ask yourself if there's another way to solve it. You should go back to the question, set it up using algebra, see if there's another way to set up the algebra, chart it out, use estimation, whatever that is, work backwards from the answer choices. Try to find multiple ways to approach the same problem and then actually do it so that you can ask yourself, which way did I like better? If you didn't the first time around, certainly in review, think about what mistakes the GMAT is expecting people to make, whether there were kind of structural issues or, those evil twins, things like that. Think about patterns you want to recognize. So that could be the idea of like, okay, when there are people driving toward each other problems, they often ask for the distance when they meet. They might ask for the time when they meet. So think about what you've seen before and variations. And then as a bonus, if you want, think about what a harder version of the question might look like. What if this one had variables in the answer choice instead of concrete numbers given? Could you approach it the same way, or would you have to do something different? So really take the time to pull apart and dig into the ones you got right, even if they don't seem that hard. There's stuff to learn there about the test and about yourself as a test taker. So one thing that I want us to do, and humor me here for a moment, I'm going to share with you, this is my version of the review log that I like to use. You should hopefully all be able to open that. I'm going to screen share the review log and just give you a demo of how I would use this. There I see lots of imaginary little animals popping up there. So what you would do on here, and I know it's pretty small and hard to see, but you would log, okay, the source for this would be this webinar, so less important. So for that first one, got it wrong. It was a rate and work question. The mistake that I made was I solved for the wrong thing. And then I would describe in detail here, it was asking for, ignore my terrible typing, a ratio of times, but I solved for, et cetera, et cetera. And then over here, this is the important part, define a takeaway. So my takeaway would be define the question before solving. Another takeaway would be, I could have eliminated the answer I chose with the pen down process. So those would be the things that I want to think about for next time. Define the question, use that pen down process. But then I also want to log the one that I got right. That was also a rate and work problem. I should probably separate those into distance versus work. But in any case, you wouldn't classify error type because there wasn't one. So there was no need to describe the error here. But some takeaways, drawing a chart worked well. Algebra would have been harder. Whatever it is for you, define takeaways for the ones that you got right as well. Tell yourself which strategy you want to use in which cases and why. If there was like, maybe you set it up and solved it well, but there was something you could have done better, should have used the pen down process to eliminate before starting, whatever that is. I'd be willing to guess that most of you aren't doing this yet, and so you are missing opportunities to prevent errors before they happen. So you are welcome. You have view-only privileges of that review log, but you can create your own version and start using that right away. So coming back to here, that was all about getting more accurate. The last thing that I want to talk about is getting faster. So getting fast. I mean, I think training for the GMAT is a bit like maybe training for a marathon. At the beginning, you might be really slow, and then with a lot of practice, you will be a faster runner. But at a certain point, you're running as fast as you can run, right? A lot more time spent training isn't necessarily going to make you a way faster runner. With marathons, I mean, that's kind of it. You just train, you hope for the best. The GMAT's not like that. You don't have to be faster in how you set up and execute your algebra. The way to get faster is actually to get smarter. It's to find shortcuts, to find alternative ways of solving that on certain problems save you time. If you can shave off 1 minute from a certain problem and apply that minute to others, you don't need to be faster in your algebraic setup and solving generally. You just need to find a handful of shortcuts to save yourself time overall. So, we don't have a ton of time remaining. So instead of making you solve this next problem multiple ways, which is what I was going to do, instead, I want you to just take a look at this problem, pen down process, and think about the options that are available to you for solving. All right. So when we use that pen down process, read through this one, we see that it is the kind of word problem where we're talking about rate times time. Oh, hey, it's another rate problem, but a very different kind of rate problem. This is a word problem that you might see that's like price times quantity and total. Here, it's hourly rate times amount of time worked equals amount of money made. So with these, we have two variables. And it's asking for one of them, her typical hourly rate. We're given that both the time and the hourly rate would change from one scenario to another. I love that Ava noticed here that C and D are 10 apart. When it's asking about typical hourly rate, but then we're told in the problem she ended up with 10 less per hour than her typical rate, it is reasonable to think that they're probably going to include a trap for the rate that would be typical, but then the rate that she ended up with. So ones that are 10 apart, it seems pretty likely that the answer would be one of those. And other things that people are noticing, we've got a lot of multiples of 4. E is a multiple of A. Things like that are worth noticing here. We also might notice if there are things that multiply to 720. Anyone notice any pairs like that? Here's where we'd have to do a little bit of arithmetic in our heads. Okay, so 24 times, okay, so 72 is a factor of 720. Yeah, I was thinking about pairs that multiplied. So, ooh, 24 and 30 are a pair that multiply to 720. Any others? This might be too much arithmetic to do in your heads. 18 and 40, also a pair that multiplies to 720. If doing that much arithmetic in your head is like too much, I'm not suggesting that for the pen down process you do all of that. That is a lot of arithmetic. But I want to talk about this now. Certainly seems like 72 is an outlier. We kind of like the 30 and 40 idea as the ones that are 10 apart. But if we were going to solve this, what are our options for solving? We could do algebra, right? Because there are two variables, the typical hourly rate, amount of time estimated, and then the changes to that. So we could do two variables, two equations, or we could test the answer choices. So I want you to screenshot this problem because we don't have time to do it here. The algebra is very difficult. It is messy. The algebra gets like pretty awful on this one. It's good for you to know how to do it algebraically, but the reason that the algebra gets so messy is that it ends up looking like a quadratic, not looking like, it turns into a quadratic. So if her hourly rate, so we're looking at typical her hourly rate times the amount of time it took, rate times time would normally equal 720. But when that's changed, it's going to be rate minus 10 and time plus 6 equals 720. When we try to solve for r, if we isolate t as 720 over r, it's going to get messy and gross and turn into a very ugly quadratic. It is really difficult to execute that in under 4 minutes. So working backwards from the answer choices might be a faster strategy here if you're fast with your arithmetic. If you were able to quickly kind of think about factors of 720 in your head, that would be much, much faster to do. So there is a rule for how to know when you're allowed to work backwards from answer choices. You are allowed to work backwards if, and pretty much only if, the question asks for the value of a single unknown. So in other words, here, r equals what? If it was asking for a difference or a sum or a product, we couldn't. But here it's just what is r? We can then plug these values in for r. You can use a mixture of these two strategies, setting it up algebraically, but then deciding you don't want to solve and actually plugging the answers into the equations that you set up. So I recommend take a screenshot of this, try it yourself, see what it looks like if you do the algebra, and then see what it looks like if you work backwards and decide which one was better for you. A lot of it's personal preference. I think probably for most people, working backwards is easier on this question, but some people prefer the algebra. But the only way that you're going to know what's faster for you is if you do each question multiple times if there are multiple ways to do it. If you get it right the first time, okay, cool. Redo the problem using the other strategy so that you're building both muscles. If you only ever do the algebra, that's the only muscle you have to use, and you're not going to notice when other strategies are faster or easier. But then one more thing I'll say, so that's the strategy for getting faster, is to train yourself to solve things in a lot of different ways so that you recognize where to take some shortcuts. And so the method would be to, yeah, take the answer choices, which would represent R, and then see like what T would you get, and then would a $10 change and a $6 change also result in something that equals 720. So if you are, I'm seeing a question in the chat that says, right now, every question I look at, the only way to solve it is algebra. Would you suggest that I stop and try exploring more ways? Yes, I absolutely would. If you know that you default to algebra every time, I want you to go back to, I would say start with a bunch that you've already solved so that you already know you can get to the answer. You'll resist that urge to like, I gotta get it right. And really explore, can I find other ways to do it? And then when you look at new problems, really look to them with the eye of like, what are all of the different ways I could solve it? Give yourself, I mean, sometimes there are 3 or 4 different ways. And so you really want to try all of those out before you're done with the question. And then just one final thing I want to say here. If you want to get fast, you have to learn when to guess and move on. Unless you are somehow a speed demon, which most of us aren't, here's what I'd say. Until you are scoring above an 85 out of 90 on the quant, the scoring scale is 60 to 90. Anytime up until 85, you can get lots of questions wrong. You will be getting lots of questions wrong, What you want to do is choose which ones, if there's something that you're going to get it wrong quickly and say to yourself, this one's not worth my time. Instead, I'm just going to pick an answer and invest that time on a question that's more gettable. You should be skipping probably 2 to 4 really hard questions so that you can dedicate that time to the medium hard ones that are more gettable for you. And then once you're above a 65, then you can solve everything. But until you get to that point, you should be skipping a few hard ones. And don't wait until minute 3 to skip. At the beginning, if you're like, I know that I'm not great at the 3-part overlapping sets, I'm just going to pick C and move on. So, with that, that's the time we have. I just want to let you all know that we have live classes with amazing instructors. I have a class starting next week on Monday, but we also have lots of other classes starting if you want to find a live class with an instructor who can give you that expert ways of looking at things, who can help push you and help keep your study process structured. We'd love to have you join us. But if not, you're always welcome to sign into our free webinars. We appreciate having you. And thank you all for your participation. Thank you for your engagement. It was great working with you. And good luck with your studies. I hope it all goes well. Take care.